Welcome back, nerds and turds, to how to use your HomePod adapter and restore the software. This is for the first gen A1639 Apple HomePod, of course. Obviously, we're doing this live, so I apologize if this isn't the prettiest how-to guide, but hopefully this will get the point across. And well, we've started shipping these adapters out a few days ago, and people have already started getting them and actually trying them with success. So we need to put a how-to out there to prevent potential problems or damage for those that aren't too sure how to do this. This is basically what these adapters look like. It's just the 3D printed plastic, some pogo pins, and then we've right-angled the cable coming out to minimize the amount of stress on this and hot glued that down. Not the prettiest, but very functional, and what we could do with the time and materials and budget that we have here. We'll definitely come out with like a V2 someday that's much more refined, and well, if you don't even want to use it, it's going to be nice enough just to have as kind of like a next fix piece of merchandise, you know? But anyways, this is the functional bit that we're shooting out to people right now so people can get their stuff restored sooner than later. How you're going to do this, and really quick, there's essentially 3 variants that are going out. You've got USB-A, which is literally just the dongle to USB-A. You've got USB-C. And then if it's not a USB-C cable, it's USB-A with the USB dongle on it. So you get a little extra bonus there if you ordered USB-C and end up with one of these. You got a little freebie there. And then there's also the UART version. This is not, you know, this was my very first one. The UART ones you get will be a little nicer than this. But the only difference, you still have that USB cable, but now you've also got 3 extra breakout lines here. And what you do with these is the black one is your ground. That goes into the ground port on your UART adapter. And then you've got TX and RX lines. And those obviously go into the TX and RX lines on your adapter. If you got the UART version and you're not getting UART logs out of your HomePod, it's possible that your little wires here connecting to these going into the HomePod aren't making a good connection. So sometimes what I've needed to do personally is just cut the wires, splice them on, so that way I've got a good solid connection into my USB UART adapter. Also, as a side note, obviously we won't be including these, but the one that I recommend if you're doing UART is the SH-U09C5. So, if you have any other questions about any of this, feel free to go to the GitHub guide or shoot me an email, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. Alright, so we're going to... Actually, one other thing about the UART. If we head over to my other repo, HomePod Simple, I have some extra notes on using that UART adapter. And I'm going to be adding more here. Basically, you get the UART lines connected and you run a screen command. If you're messing with UART, you probably know how to use it, so I won't spend too much time on that. This is mostly for people that don't really know what they're doing. So, here we go. We're going to start with nothing plugged into anything. we don't want power or anything plugged into the HomePod, and we don't want our dongle plugged into the computer yet. The first thing we're going to do is look on the bottom of our dongle where the pins are, and we're going to make a mental note of where that little plastic nub right here is. You see how it's got one on the top and not on the bottom? That is going to line up with the little notch on the debug port of the HomePod. If we take a closer look here, you can see that little notch there. So those two are going to line up with each other. And let me grab the rubber base really quick, and I'll show you guys how to remove that, because that'll be the first step, obviously. So you've got your HomePod, you got your adapter, you got your computer. This is how we get the adapter connected. So you're going to take your fingers and dig in there, and it's going to be a little tough, but you're gonna try to get in there and get a grip on it. You might need to sort of like go around it with your fingers like this, try to break it loose, and then peel it straight off. If you break a couple of these plastic tabs, it's not the end of the world. That double-sided tape is rather strong. So put that base to the side. And then I like to orient my HomePod with the AC connector facing away from me, and that little notch on the debug port also facing away from me. And then we are going to grab our adapter. Still nothing plugged into anything. We're going to find that notch on the adapter, make sure we're lined up right, and we're going to go straight down. I'm just going to kind of wiggle it a little bit. It should pretty much settle into where it needs to. And then we can hold that down and grab our T6 screwdriver, and we're going to put all four of those screws in. And this is the trickiest part, because the speakers right underneath this obviously are magnetic, and they will interfere with your magnetic screwdriver tip. So let's get these in there. You want to make sure that you're actually screwing into the HomePod. If you feel the adapter start to lift up as you're tightening the screw, then you're probably not in the actual HomePod yet. Just keep giving it a little yiggle until it settles where it should. And I like to do a crisscross pattern when tightening these. So we got two of them in there. Now we can let go and put those other two in. They're going to be reasonably tight. As soon as you feel it start to bottom out on the adapter, then that's about good. You don't want to go too tight, but you don't want it to be loose. Okay. And one other fun thing you might notice, a lot of the early adopters for these adapters are getting 3D printed plastic that is heat reactive. It'll change color based on temperature. So I thought that was going to be a neat little bonus. So we've got still no power plugged into the HomePod. We will go ahead and plug our USB into our computer. And if we want to check and see if this thing even has recovery mode, or if it only gives us DFU mode, that's usually an indicator that it's a hardware problem if it doesn't give us recovery mode, but not all the time. What we'll do is we can set this on the side. We want to be careful not to put any stress on our adapter going into the HomePod here, of course. And then we are going to plug the power into our HomePod. And at this point, if we opened up Finder and there's two different places this can show up, and it takes up to 60 seconds for it to show up. It'll either show up as a HomePod here in your list of devices in Finder, or if you open, you can install Apple Configurator. And Apple Configurator will also show it. Finder doesn't always show it, so I would recommend Apple Configurator if you're poking around at this. If we double click on that, we can see we've got our HomePod there. And our HomePod's actually booted. That's because it's oriented normally, and I've already restored the software on this one, so it's working just fine. But if this was a bricked HomePod, we would want to see that say recovery mode. If not, you can still give the software restoring a try. So let's unplug this HomePod from power, and we will go over how to actually restore these HomePods. So we're going to flip this back upside down. We've got our adapter plugged into our computer and our HomePod. We do not have the HomePod powered on yet. So let's do the prerequisite software setup on our computer. And I've already worked with somebody else that has an Intel Mac on Mac OS Sonoma, and this all worked perfectly fine. It was quite exciting, the first person to get one of these in the mail, and we were able to walk them through doing all of this, and they successfully restored their HomePod, and then someone else sent me an email saying they got theirs and did it all on their own. So, blah blah blah, I like to talk a lot. You can read along if you go to github.com/unbendablestraw, and then you find my HomePod restore repo. There's links to it also on my website, mixfix.com. Go ahead and download the current IPSW file. That's a couple gigabytes, so you can let that start downloading in the background, and while you wait, you can run through some of the rest of this. Obviously, we don't want to mess with any of the dongle or unplugging it and plugging it in while the HomePod has power or the USB cable is plugged into the computer, because you've got data lines next to voltage lines, and if things aren't plugged in and not powered, then you're perfectly safe. The first thing we're going to install is Homebrew. We've got a link to that, and it gives you a very handy copy button, so you can just paste this command right into your terminal. You would just paste that right in there, and then hit enter. And I've already got it installed, so we're not going to do that. Once you've got Homebrew installed, it is going to have something like a next steps. Let me see if I have an image of it. Here we go. This is what it's going to look like after you install Homebrew for the first time. It's going to say next steps. Run these two commands in your terminal to add Homebrew to your path. If you don't do this, this won't work. So there's this first command here. That's one command. And then this is the second command. And obviously I'm not going to paste this into the guide because it depends on what your current username is on that machine, obviously, to link that brew path to your user directory. So run these two commands after you install Homebrew. Once you've got Homebrew installed and configured, you'll need to run these next. So you'll brew tap that path, brew install this guy, brew install all of these. You can copy this code block and paste it in your terminal in one go, and it should install everything. Once you've got Homebrew installed and the brew tapped and the additional brews installed, you are essentially set up and ready to restore HomePods. You don't need to do those steps every time you restore a HomePod. These are the steps that you'll do once you're set up and every time that you want to restore a HomePod. We are going to connect our HomePod via USB to the computer. And then we are going to plug power into our HomePod. We're going to see this accessory connect prompt. We want to keep an eye out for these. They will pop up throughout the restore process, and you want to allow them without too much delay, or you can possibly cause something to time out or miss, and you'll have to try it again. So with our HomePod powered on and connected upside down, we will run Gaster Pwn. We're going to wait for it to run that. We've got more accessory prompts. Now you can boot untrusted images. Perfect. Now we will run Gaster Reset. And then we will run iDevice Restore. iDevice Restore. -D is the debug flag. It just prints extra info and can help us if you run into issues. -E is to restore on, or to erase on while restoring. This isn't necessary, but it's what consistently worked for me, so that's what I'm going to suggest. And then we need to enter the path of the IPSW file that we downloaded at the very beginning. So if it's in your downloads folder, you would do like downloads. Let me get this focused. You would do downloads /17.6.ipsw. I am in the current directory that the file is, so I can just do 17.6 IPSW. One pro tip here, if you're not sure if you're pointing to the right path for your IPSW, you should be able to hit tab. If you see that, you should be able to hit tab while you're typing your file name, and it should autocomplete. That means that you're pointing to an existing file and you're in the right place. So we're going to run iDevice Restore -D -E and our IPSW file. Hit enter. It's going to ask us if we are sure we want to erase. We will enter yes. And now we sit and wait. We will continue keeping an eye on the screen for those accessory prompts. We want to leave the cable, the HomePod, everything alone. Don't touch it, don't bump it, don't do anything. This is the longest step here too, so just be patient. It may look like there are errors in the restore console there, and chances are there will be, but a lot of those errors are supposed to be there. Basically just run it, keep hitting allow on the pop-ups, and I would say if it's been more than 5 minutes and you haven't seen the restore complete message, then chances are the restore failed, something went wrong. Go ahead and try it again. There's no harm in trying as many times as you want, as long as you're careful with your hardware. To try it again, you would simply unplug the HomePod from power, wait 10-15 seconds, plug it back into power, and then reattempt your Gaster Pwn command, Gaster Reset command, and then the iDevice Restore -D -E 17.6.ipsw. While we're waiting for this to restore, I'll go ahead and catch up with that YouTube chat there. The chances of Apple patching this method through a firmware update, they seem to really not want anyone doing this, otherwise they would have put a USB port on the bottom. That is an excellent question. Good news is the way that we are accomplishing this is through a hardware vulnerability that is unpatchable. It's called Checkmate. You can look up the Checkmate vulnerability if you want to learn more about that, but essentially, Apple can push as many updates to these things as they want, and unless they physically destroy the hardware port on this, there's no way that they can stop us from continuing to do this. Now, That said, as versions of these IPSWs become unsigned, you see here we started with 17.5. That worked for a week or so, and then it was no longer signed. They updated to 17.6. You can't restore versions that aren't signed. So there's two things that we do. With a new version that comes out, more likely than not, a few changes may need to be made to the scripts to build these IPSWs, but we will try to be ahead of providing these for you so you guys don't have to worry about building them yourself. Very soon, the scripts to build these IPSWs will be a lot easier for you guys to use so that you don't have to wait for us to build these IPSWs for you to download. But pretty much that. There's no way Apple can patch this. Updates will probably require changes to the script, but there's nothing that will outright prevent us from doing this. No matter how they update this. Makes me wonder why they even bothered wiring logic into the HomePod mini power cable. Well, they've got logic in the HomePod mini power cable because you can still plug those into your computer to restore them over USB. Funny enough. Can we debug and restore a second-gen HomePod with an adapter like this one? I do not see why not. There's almost certainly USB and UART on that second-gen HomePod debug connector, just like the first-gen. Obviously, I've got one here too, we can look at that. It's a different shape. You see that? Like, someone will have to figure out what the pinout is, but there's no reason for me to believe that we can't figure that out too. Apple can make it more difficult, but in devices with the A11 or older, they cannot patch it. Yes, that's correct. Oh, David! My guy, welcome. Let's see. You can also just drag the IPSW file into your terminal window when typing out the iDevice restore command instead of typing out the direct path to your IPSW file. That is an excellent tip. David is one of the two guys that actually put all of this together and got this working for us, so give him a big thanks in the chat there. So second gen is out of luck for now. Yeah. It seems certainly possible. Again, there doesn't seem to be any reason why it can't. And I'm also sure that they are actually restoring the second gens, or at least ripping the base off and debugging them in the store. I would hope so. I mean, the base on those is easier to remove and it seems easier to put back on. Let's see. Yeah, that is correct. From the factory, those debug ports are how Apple loads the software onto these. So you can actually see a little bit of wear mark on both the first gen and second gen debug ports. You can see those wear marks from the factory when they originally loaded the firmware. We're about 56% of the way through here. I said wait at least 5 minutes before thinking something went wrong and trying again. That is, of course, waiting for, pretty much nothing to happen. If you've got a progress bar here and it's progressing, don't wait 5 minutes and then say, oh, it's 62%, it's still moving, I'm going to cancel and restart it anyways. But I think you guys know what I mean. And I do apologize for any non-English native speakers. I'm sure YouTube's auto-captioning and translation is doing us absolute justice. If I'm not mistaken, David, you did mention, it was either you or Tim Star saying something about you can technically boot unsigned or custom firmware, but you would have to tether boot it every time. I don't know if you guys recall old school jailbreaks where every time you restarted your phone, you wouldn't have a jailbreak unless you plugged it back in and re-jailbroke it. With some jailbreaks, your phone wouldn't even boot back up unless you re-jailbroke it. That I believe would be the similar case here with using custom or unsigned firmware. I mean, and I was telling this to the guy I was helping this morning who got his adapter. Even if only 10% of all of these bricked HomePods out there are indeed just software issues that can be restored like this, that is absolutely unacceptable, and it's something that Apple should have been doing for its customers this whole time. It looks like we are nearing completion here. So it's done pushing the file system. It's got some additional things to do. It's basically got to restart, initialize a few things, generate some key stuff. David would probably chime into the chat there with more details. But you can see in the log here too what it's doing. I'm operating on no sleep, so my brain is just not quite firing on all of them today. I apologize, folks. So you see here, no data to read, timeout. This is one of those things that I was talking about. Just wait, give it some time. It's working through more likely than not. Just be patient, don't touch anything. Do you think the IPSW that Apple provides through Finder for the Mini could be modified and merged to work on a Gen 2? Very unlikely. Very unlikely. I haven't... I'm pretty sure that the chipset on the Gen 2 is different than the Mini anyways. So that probably wouldn't work. Yeah, can you imagine if the only reason Apple wasn't doing this was because it was too difficult for them to remove the base in the store and they were like, screw it. Because, like, you got that little foam seal around it there. And I imagine in the store it's not going to be an acceptable thing for customers to just rip it off and slap it back on without replacing that. And I imagine in a lot of cases they end up breaking or deforming these trying to do that. So maybe they just want to avoid it altogether. Or maybe, deep conspiracy, like that's exactly what they wanted, was like absolutely no repairs on these and to just throw them in the trash every time they come back. The Mini and Gen 2 are eerily similar. I call the second gen HomePod a big version of the Mini, and the first gen HomePod stands by itself as definitely more of a standalone product, both in terms of the actual materials used and the quality of the materials, and the hardware and the time and resources put into it. They're different. They're two different things, in my opinion. I just cannot sing praise about the second gen like I can the first gen. So, we have arrived. We've got status restore finished. In a lot of cases, it'll say done, and you'll be returned to your command line. At this point, you can unplug the HomePod from power and disconnect everything. We'll go over that in a second. If you get status restore finished, and it hasn't exited yet, as soon as you see restore finished, you're good to go. You don't need to wait any longer. So here's how we're going to wrap this up. We're going to unplug the HomePod from power first, and then we're going to unplug the USB cable from our computer next, and then we will take the screws out of our adapter, pick those screws up and get them out of there before you pull this adapter off, because they will fly all over the place. And then you can either take your screwdriver or, let's see, any kind of flat tool, and you want to just very nicely come into here and pry this up a little bit, because it's going to be stuck down really well to that factory adhesive. And we just want to kind of pull this straight up as possible. There we go. We can toss this in a drawer, save it for another bricky day. Let's get our base put back on. We have that little notch there that we can orient ourselves with. If you wiggle it a little bit, it'll settle right in place. And that's it, folks. Grab your power cable, flip it around, plug it in, give it a few minutes. It's going to boot up, more than likely restart a few times while it initializes, and within a minute or so you should see the pulsing white light with the setup chime play. Like I was saying earlier, if you get any errors or issues during restoring the software, unplug the power, wait a few seconds, plug it back in, try again. You can also try disconnecting your adapter from the HomePod and reseating that. I've noticed sometimes the adhesive on the bottom of the HomePod around the debug port is thicker than usual, so you might need to remove that adhesive if you're not getting a good connection. But I've tested every single one of these before I ship them out. I wiggle the connector on the HomePod, I wiggle the whole cable, and I do that during a restore, and if they drop out while I'm doing that, then they go back to get redone. And that said, don't mess with it while it's restoring. Just give it the best chance possible, eh? So we're just gonna wait for this to finish starting up, and that'll be it for this episode, this video, this live stream. We've got more dongles to make. We've got a bunch of HomePods that need to get fixed that we've promised for people. We got a lot of catching up to do. I'm gonna take my tape off. And obviously you don't need to take the top off of your HomePod to do any of this. We just have the top off of ours because we've been swapping logic boards around. And there we go. There we go. Folks, I hope you all enjoyed this little how-to here. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the YouTube comments. That's going to be the slowest response you'll get from me, though. You can join our Discord server, discord.gg/track44. I've got a link to it, a link to our Discord server at the top of my website, nixfix.com, as well. You can drop in there and ask us questions. There's plenty of other people in there that are more than happy to beat me to the answer and are usually more correct than I am as well. And last but not least, you've got my email address on my website, and if you want to pick up one of these dongles, you're more than welcome to. Please be patient as I work through them. It takes some time to print and assemble these and test them. So, yeah. That is it. I will